Okay.
Okay, hi, I'm Karen Micus, Healthy Lifestyle Center, and I would like to introduce, I'm so excited about this, Dr. Catherine Shanahan. She is a board-certified family physician and globally recognized nutrition science thought leader, New York Times bestselling author, and sought-after speaker. She trained in biochemistry and genetics at Cornell University before attending Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. Dr. Kate attended medical school with an interest in how nutrition affects genetic health, but graduated not having learned much about nutrition. She practiced in Hawaii for 10 years, where she studied ethnobotany and her healthiest patients' culinary habits. Hawaii has the longest lifespan of any state. Is that still true, Dr. Kate?
As far as I know, yeah, that takes a long time to change, but yeah.
That experience gave Dr. Kate findings that led to her book, Deep Nutrition, Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food. I found Dr. Kate through her book, The Fatburn Fix, Boost Energy and Hunger and Lose Weight by using body fat for fuel. This book really spoke to me, helped me personally, and became the impetus for the 5-part metabolic health series we're offering right now. So thank you, Dr. Kate, and welcome.
Thanks. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And thanks for the lovely introduction. Just before I get started, I'm gonna try to sit up, but I got bit by a spider and my foot is like swelling up and it's so itchy. It feels better if I elevate it. So I may have to like lean back sometimes. I don't know. I'm not sure what you can see, but if you're seeing me in a weird position, that's why. So, okay, you are seeing my screen right now, the big fake. See that?
Right.
The big fat fake. Okay. So, yeah, what I want to talk about is it's a real huge kind of quiet scandal that has been played out on the American public for the past 70 years or so, and hardly anybody's talking about it. It's so big and so like so many moving parts to it that even some of the people that are now involved in it, I don't even know that they know where it started. So what I want to do is kind of put it all together and show you that Harvard and the American Heart Association are making us sick because they have this elaborate campaign that's been going on, like I said, 7 years, to make us afraid of actual real food that we used to eat, that people around the world used to eat, that people in America used to eat, used to make them really healthy, and instead buy processed food. And the number one ingredient in processed food that's unhealthy are these seed oils that I'm going to be talking about. So how does this, it's a like I said, it's a story that's been going on for about 70 years. And I want to start at the beginning. I think that's the most logical place to start, with the person that actually is responsible for it. And I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'm going to try. If you can hear it.
Strike without warning.
Can you hear it?
Of 10 men, we can expect 5 to get it. But we can't say who or when or what.
When the war ended, Ansel Keys turned his scientific curiosity toward the new American plague, as he called it, coronary heart disease.
Oops. I think I stopped sharing the screen instead of what I was meaning to click. Let's see here now. Share screen. Are you seeing it again?
Yes.
Okay. Did you hear that, or could you at least read the subtitles?
Yes.
So what this is a clip from an advertisement, a real ad that shoot, I don't know how to navigate this. All this stuff in the way. that this man named Ansel Keys put together back in the 1950s, when we were first experiencing heart attacks killing people. So it helps to know that until like President Eisenhower, actually, so back in the Eisenhower era, we're talking like 1948, until that point in history, nobody really knew or thought about heart attacks. Nobody worried about cholesterol. And they didn't even know really what a heart attack was. They didn't even call it that. They called it a coronary. And they were so rare. Heart attacks were so rare just a few years prior, like in the 20s, that doctors could go their whole careers, heart specialists could go their whole careers and never see a coronary or a heart attack. So it was really a new thing that was happening. It was a new phenomenon. And it was really scary because it was affecting, well, it affected a beloved president, Eisenhower, and he was like out of the picture for 6 weeks. He was on strict bed rest. They didn't really know how to treat it. It was killing people. And as Ansel Keys just showed us, when he was dramatically knocking over those 5 little wooden men, that we don't know who, at this point in time, they didn't know what caused it, but it was killing a lot of people. Now, it wasn't killing 5 out of 10 males. I want to make this point. It was killing males in a specific age group, but at a high rate. So between the age of 40 and 59, white executives, okay, like, so not just anybody, but like white executives at that point in time were dropping dead at a fairly high rate. But it wasn't everybody, right? It wasn't 5 out of 10 men. It was just these white executives and, people like President Eisenhower. And so, but it was, so Ansel Keys was a guy who was really good at kind of twisting the truth a little bit to tell a great story. And unfortunately for all of us, he wanted to be the star of the story in the end. And the story he wanted to be a star of was who's the guy that's going to come to the rescue of America, really, in the grips of fear of this new American plague of these heart attacks. Who's going to rescue us by giving us an explanation as to what's really causing it here? That's the story he wanted to tell. And by hook or by crook, he was going to be the hero of that story. And the reason I have to say by hook or by crook is because at the time, this was in the late 40s and early 50s. At the time, doctors already knew, they already had a really good idea what was causing heart attacks. It was cigarette smoking. But like, he didn't want that to be the case. He wanted to come in and say it was something else because he had a little theory. And maybe he really believed in his theory. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was all just ego. No one knows. Lost to history. He's dead. But at the time, in the 1940s, this was after World War II. And people were smoking like chimneys. Like, anybody who knows anybody who was in World War II, probably they were a smoker for a good portion of their lives, because they gave the soldiers cigarettes in their food rations, right? These things called K rations, they had cigarettes in there, and that was how they sustained their energy to some degree, but they also got soldiers totally addicted to cigarettes because, it's an addicting substance. Anything that gives you energy tends to be highly addictive, and cigarettes are. Now, an interesting little sideline here that I think is really important is that K ration was the name of the rations that the military got, right? That had the cigarettes and a bunch of processed food in there. And that was designed not to really nourish the soldiers, but to keep them from dropping dead of starvation out in the field for extended, like, emergency use. Unfortunately, it became extended use. And so people got pretty sick because it was mostly processed food like cookies. And some people described it as junk food, which it truly was. But Why is it called a K ration? Well, K stands for Keys. The person who put the K ration together was Ansel Keys. So he was a very powerful figure in the world of processed food already, because he had those massive military contracts were all funneled through him. Oh, and guess what? Cigarettes too, because he put the cigarettes in there because people complained, well, we don't want this to be just junk food. We got to have something else in there. So he thought, okay, I'll throw in some cigarettes. Great idea for health. I also want to point out something about Ansel Keys, that he presents himself like he's a physician here, but he's not. He's not a medical doctor. He's a oceanographer specializing in eels. So how he got to this position, there's a story behind that too, but it just kind of, he's in charge of feeding the military. He's not even a medical doctor. He's not even a human physiologist. He's an eel physiologist. So just to show you, just to illustrate, you can't do that unless you're pretty good at social engineering. So he was very good at that. And here's what happened with cigarette smoking. Here's the history of United States cigarette smoking and why, it really truly was the #1 cause of heart attacks at the time. Ansel Keys was trying to take over the story and diverted everyone's attention away from cigarettes towards his little theory, which was saturated fat was causing heart attacks. And if you've heard that saturated fat causes heart attacks, that's because of Ansel Keys. If you've been somebody who was trying to eat healthy and were worried about your cholesterol level or eating too much butter or maybe choosing chicken instead of steak, that's because of Ansel Keys. And what I'm telling you is it's all made up by not just Ansel Keys. He kind of started it, but like I said at the beginning, this has become an elaborate fraud perpetrated on the American public. And so it wasn't just him. But here's what was really happening with heart attacks. Here's why people were, executives especially, were dropping dead of heart attacks. Well, they were 4-pack-a-day smokers back then. We have never smoked as much since we did in the 50s. So this is a graph of how much we smoked between 1900 and just about the year 2000. And this is cigarettes per capita. So this is per person. So you can see that at the beginning of the century, hardly anybody smoked. During the Great Depression, people smoked, interestingly. Well, actually, yeah, I guess they weren't eating. So cigarettes have an appetite suppressant effect. So maybe that's why they were anyway. Right around after the Great Depression, it skyrocketed. It totally skyrocketed right around World War II, right here, just when Ansel Keys was putting them in the K rations. And then the GIs and everybody just were smoking like chimneys for a good 2-3 decades after that. And then, it became clear in the 80s that cigarette smoking was linked to heart attacks and cancer, but it really wasn't clear until it wasn't clear to, the general public until the 80s. It started to become fairly clear in the 70s, and it took about 10 years before people really started believing it and, really being able to not start smoking. That's really why this goes down. Is a huge part of it is just fewer people started smoking, and unfortunately, a lot of smokers died. So the number of people smoking per capita went down dramatically. But this all happened, because of this was all fairly clear to doctors because they knew what their patients were doing. They knew that it was the smokers who were having heart attacks, and it was the heaviest smokers who were the ones who were dying of heart attacks. And those tended to be the white male executives because they needed to have that energy all day long, especially. Right. And so especially also, they were the ones that would see the heart specialists instead of just seeing a general emergency doctor, right? Because they were wealthy. So that was the real cause in Ansel Keys' day. And we know that now, like everybody knows cigarette smoking is the major cause of heart disease. But why didn't we know it then? Like, why did it take so long? And that's something that I want to tell you guys is like the most important point of this. It's because the American Heart Association suppressed it. They actually were the only people that were collecting data to show that there was a link between cigarette smoking and heart attacks. And there wasn't really much of a link between cholesterol or saturated fat or diet and heart attacks at that point in time. So this, what I'm showing you here on this slide is from the American Heart Association's website. They have a little timeline of how great they are, basically. And they say they're showing on their own website, they're saying in 1956, they make their first statement on smoking and heart disease. And what it says is, we don't have enough evidence to say that cigarette smoking causes heart disease. And at the time, they never said anything. They never said that they were taking it seriously. They basically said, go ahead and keep smoking. In fact, when Ansel Keys was interviewed, so Ansel Keys is the guy at the beginning here, our bad guy. He was interviewed by Time magazine in 1961, and he specifically calls out everyone else who was looking at saturated fat and other factors. Everyone else who was looking at smoking and blood pressure, which was linked to smoking, as causes of heart disease. He was saying they're stupid. They don't know anything. I've got more data, and I'm seeing that the real link is saturated fat. So getting back to this slide and what's on this slide, in 1956, they claim that fat and cholesterol are linked, right? So that's like, oh gosh, that seems bad. Fat and cholesterol are linked. But wait, linked to what? And this is the kind of wordplay that the American Heart Association uses to confuse everybody. There's just innuendo here. There's nothing solid. If you read the text of this, and I'll read it to you. Dr. Ansel Keys, supported by funding from the Minnesota affiliate, first links dietary fat with cholesterol. Not with heart attacks, not with dying, not with anything like really bad, just with cholesterol. If you eat more dietary fat, your cholesterol goes up, certain kinds of fats. And certain other kinds of fats make your cholesterol seem to go down a little bit. But regardless of the fact that they didn't have it linked to any disease or anything, they say this discovery spurs the American Heart Association to assume a leading role in urging Americans to change their eating habits. Change them to what? To eating less fat and eating especially less saturated fat and more of this other kind of fat called polyunsaturated fat, which nobody was really thinking about or nobody heard of. Nobody was hardly eating any of it. I'm going to talk more about polyunsaturated fat in a minute because it's truly toxic. And that's why I say that this is like a huge fraud perpetrated on the American public. So anyway, why exactly, if you just read this, why they don't put any evidence here as to why anybody should change their eating habits? Because so what if saturated fat and cholesterol are linked? But this is very important I'm showing you this because like, if I didn't explain this to you and you just read it, you might think, oh gosh, fat and cholesterol must be linked to something bad, right? Otherwise, why is it even here? But the truth is it wasn't linked to anything bad. In fact, it was so not linked to anything bad. Like they kept trying. Ansel Keys and the American Heart Association and a whole bunch of other people who had no like skin in the game did a lot of work collecting a lot of data. And one of the biggest studies ever done that's still ongoing is this thing called the Framingham Study. Like if anybody's in medicine, nursing, went to medical school, went to chiropractor school, you probably heard of these Framingham studies that are the supposed reason, the supposed link between dietary fat and dying from heart attacks. But the truth is that's all just based also on innuendo and misconstruing the reality by people who had skin in the game. This guy, George V. Mann, is from Vanderbilt University. He did not have skin in the game. He wasn't working with, like Ansel Keys was, with processed food or with cigarette manufacturers. He was just a good scientist. And they had to hire scientists to do this study. And they hired this Dr. Mann to design the nutrition aspect of it, like to try and tease out, was there a relationship between what people ate and heart attacks? So the Framingham Study is named after Framingham, Massachusetts, and they're still going on with this study. And they're still like claiming that it shows a link between saturated fat, cholesterol, and heart attacks. And at the time that George Mann was interviewed, this was in 1970, he said that 20 years into the study, into the Framingham study, and hundreds of millions of dollars into it, we don't see any evidence linking saturated fat and cholesterol to heart attacks or strokes, or really anything bad. And so this is where they were in the 70s. There were people who were heavily involved in these studies that were coming out periodically and saying these kinds of things that are pretty shocking. Like, we're not seeing any evidence of this stuff. So back in the 70s, there was still a good number of practicing physicians who were hearing both sides of the story. But what I'm telling you is that I never heard this side of the story. And now physicians don't hear this other side of the story. We have all been sold a bill of goods. And I want to show you just how ridiculous it is. On the next slide, this is something that the American Heart Association never talks about: the correlation between smoking, heart attack deaths, and the lack of correlation between saturated fat consumption on a per capita basis over the past 100 years. So let me break this down. So at the bottom here, we have the time, right? So between 1900 and 2000. So this reddish line here is heart attack, disease, and deaths per capita, adjusted for population, because the population's growing, right? So you have to do it per capita, per percent of the 100,000 of the population. So in the beginning of the century, we didn't have very many heart attack deaths, or heart disease or heart attack deaths, right? We had very few heart attack deaths, but there was a lot of heart disease because it was from infectious disease. So it kind of skews it. But this is the combination of heart disease, deaths from any kind of heart disease, right? They really reached their peak when cigarette smoking reached its peak. And now it's coming down as cigarette smoking comes down, at least till just around the year 2010, it was coming down. Okay, after that's a different story, but I want to focus on between 1900 and 2010. So you can see clearly that heart attack deaths peaked and now are coming down. And this is all kinds of heart attacks. So heart attacks, or heart disease at the beginning of the century before antibiotics was mostly infectious disease. Somewhere in here, it changes over to being mostly cigarette smoking related. As we come up with cigarette smoking and people are becoming, 2, 3, 4 pack a day cigarette smokers, we see lots of heart disease. As people smoke less, we still have a good number of smokers, but we don't have so many people smoking so much. You really see a dramatic decline in heart disease, heart attack deaths, heart disease deaths, per capita. And so so this is the cigarette smoking line, right? This is cigarette smoking per capita. We're really, really dropped down on that. We've dropped down to about where we were before World War II, before the Great Depression, which is great. And here, this line is the saturated fat consumption. This is flat, okay? So per capita, people are not really eating any more or any less saturated fat than they were at the beginning of the century. Hasn't really changed. Where it comes from might be a little bit different. We might be getting it now from more from margarine and hydrogenated oils and processed food, but the saturated fat itself hasn't changed. So how can you look at this and say saturated fat has any role in heart disease when you have a much better smoking gun, literally, in cigarettes? And I'm pointing this out because the American Heart Association has never apologized for continuing to let people smoke between the year 1956 and the year 1981, when they finally came out. That was when they finally came out and said, and got on board with the idea that cigarette smoking causes heart attacks and is bad for you. It took them almost 30 years. And they let people die of heart attacks in that whole time. So this is why I take a really, like, I cannot believe that these people are getting away with this, but they're getting away with it. And I'm going to show you how. Let me show you what else they're getting away with. It's not just that they lied about cigarette smoking. It's that they're pushing something else on us. So we haven't eaten very much more saturated fat over the years, but what have we eaten more of? And that's what I like discovered about almost 20 years ago now. We've been eating more seed oil, things like corn, canola, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower. These oils come from factories and they have a very different fatty acid profile. They are low in saturated fat and they're very high in polyunsaturated fat. And that means that we've been really truly in a experiment, because we've changed the chemical nature of our diet dramatically. Just this one change is a bigger change than all of the other changes in human history. And it's happened over the past 100 years. So as we've eaten more and more seed oils, we've gotten more and more disease. This is diabetes type 2 and prediabetes. This is the rates of diabetes and prediabetes you can see go completely in parallel with the consumption of seed oils over the past 110 years or so. And prediabetes and diabetes are more than just high blood sugar. These diseases they're really like associated with every other disease that you've heard of as a common thing. If you're worried about having a heart attack and you're a diabetic, your risk is, you pretty much don't have heart attacks these days, unless you're a diabetic, or of course, if you're a heavy smoker. Cancer is linked to diabetes and prediabetes. Alzheimer's is linked to diabetes and prediabetes. A very popular neurologist here in Florida and practicing in Naples, David Perlmutter, he calls Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because diabetes is so tightly linked. Like he says, he's never seen anybody with Alzheimer's that didn't have either diabetes or prediabetes. So I could go on. I mean, it's like every disease you've ever heard of: hypertension, gout, fatty liver, osteoporosis, like everything you might not want to get, right? Asthma, diseases in kids even have gone up in parallel with our seed oil consumption. We have children now with type 2 diabetes. We have children with pre-diabetes. We have children with insulin resistance. We have more overweight children now than we had overweight adults 50 years ago. So almost everyone in this country is suffering from this idea that saturated fat is bad for us. That was made up by Ansel Keys and has been carried forward for generations now. And I think it's an outrage. So if you want to know why these seed oils are so bad, I want to just touch on that for a minute here. Seed oils have these things called polyunsaturated fatty acids. What the heck is that? Well, polyunsaturated is the opposite kind of fat from saturated in a sense. So saturated fat doesn't have these double bonds. Polyunsaturated fat has 2 or more double bonds. And it just turns out chemically that when you're a polyunsaturated fat, then it's very easy for oxygen to attack this molecule and break it down into toxins. And that's what happens. So that's what happens when you're cooking with it. It's what happens when, even before you get to it, while it's processed, as it's sitting on the shelf and you buy seed oil to cook with. It happens in restaurants that use seed oils in their deep fryers, on their grill, when you're going out to eat, when you're getting your pizza, when you're getting your, Chinese food, even when you're at a fancy sit down restaurant, certainly at McDonald's, you're eating lots and lots of these broken down bits of polyunsaturated fatty acids that are hugely toxic, so toxic that members of seed oil, like super geeks on seed oil, who are the people who try to make this stuff be less toxic, they're called oil scientists, logically. The oil scientists have just like been warning for decades that they can't make these things safe for human consumption. And they would rather, if they could do it, they would rather say, you guys, you should be eating lard and tallow, like old fashioned animal fat. When I was a kid in McDonald's, fries were cooked in tallow and they were delicious, but McDonald's isn't allowed to do that anymore because of the American Heart Association. So anyway, it's the chemical makeup of these things, which is radically different than the kinds of fats that people have eaten throughout our entire human history, because we couldn't have manufactured these things. You can't make seed oils like on any kind of scale without industrial processing. So that's why we have this graph that's gone up, because we're eating them in droves, and we're processing them. They're inexpensive. They make foods have a longer shelf life than butter. Butter you got to keep in the fridge. Animal fat you got to keep in the fridge. Seed oils, you don't have to do that, so it's cheaper. Oh, and P.S. you didn't have to feed an animal. You didn't have to raise an animal. You just had to get your subsidy for growing corn and soy. So it's like a fraction of the cost. So that's why they use them. And just in case you wanted to take a snapshot of the list, this is the list of the 8. There's actually 8 of them. So I have 6 on top here because these are the ones you're going to find when you're going grocery shopping. These 2 on the bottom are the ones you're going to see when you are the ones that you're not going to see them. Actually, you have to ask about it when you go out to eat. So this is what restaurants also use these 2. The restaurants will use any of these, and they additionally use grapeseed and rice bran. So we're just eating tons of the stuff. It's hard to avoid. And yeah, the American Heart Association, even though we're barely eating any saturated fat, right? They still seriously say we need to keep on replacing it with more polyunsaturated fatty acids. And they keep pumping out these kinds of articles. This is Harvard and the American Heart Association are basically like one and the same. Like everybody who works at the Harvard School of Public Health and Nutrition has published multiple journals, multiple articles, done multiple studies for the American Heart Association. So they can't function without each other. Now, as far as like this whole disinformation campaign around saturated fat, they need Harvard. The American Heart Association needs Harvard's credibility and needs Harvard's like brand name to make their crappy research look like real research. Why would the American Heart Association do this? Well, this is why. Back in the 1940s, the American Heart Association was just a little collection of cardiologists who had to pay money to join the American Heart Association. That was the only way they could get any money. Then they decided that they would accept industry money. And basically, very soon after that, didn't take long, they got a huge infusion of cash. It was like $1.7 million back in 1948. So it's like 10 times that much today, from Procter and Gamble. So this is what Procter and Gamble made at the time, mostly cleaning products, but there is some food here, Crisco. This is hydrogenated vegetable oil. So this is the simple explanation. Why is the American Heart Association recommending vegetable oil? It's never been more complicated than this. Well, you can add in the complication of Ansel Keys and his ego, because he helped. He actually was hugely influential in engineering the relationship between Procter and Gamble and the American Heart Association. That didn't come from nowhere. He was involved with that. So this is the reason the American Heart Association recommends polyunsaturated fatty acids. This is also the reason the American Heart Association says we shouldn't eat saturated fat, because these oils are very low in saturated fat. The oils. Crisco is hydrogenated vegetable oil. So the hydrogenation process is a chemical process that creates trans fats. It also creates some artificial saturated fats. But none of these things are good for you. And the American Heart Association recommends them, or they did. They recommended both of these. Now that everybody knows trans fat is bad, they stopped recommending the hydrogenated oils, except they sort of still recommend them because they still recommend margarine. So they're completely just saying what they're paid to say. You can go to the American Heart Association website and you can search margarine, and you'll see that they have recipes where they recommend margarine. Margarine is chock full of trans fat. And I think probably everybody listening knows that trans fat is something you're supposed to avoid, right? They're actually making it like illegal. That's not going to be able to be used in restaurants in a few years. So this slide is showing how heavily they were advertising for seed oils, specifically as the polyunsaturated fatty acid part of the seed oils, right? Back in these are ads from the 60s and 70s. And they made polyunsaturated fatty acids seem like it was just this cure-all. And these were articles that kids would run into. So children would be asking their parents, why are you feeding me butter? And obviously parents would be reading it and doctors would be reading it. And I read it. I remember my dad is a doctor and I saw ads just like this when I was growing up as a kid. And I just thought it was gospel truth. I was like, wow, yeah, good thing my mom gets corn oil and good thing we eat margarine. Thank goodness we don't have any of that devil butter in our house. So this is like how doctors now have been brainwashed. I mean, literally, none of this is true. These ads are a complete lie. There was no data back when they were created. In fact, they were, if you haven't seen there's a reason you haven't seen ads like specifically talking about polyunsaturated fatty acids as medicine, because the FTC shut that down. They said, stop doing that because there is no basis in reality. It is a false claim. So that's why we don't see these ads anymore, because it became illegal. So what did the American Heart Association do? Well, they helped out their friends again, because they actually have plenty of ways to create evidence. The American Heart Association has these 13 journals that they publish. Some of them come out every week. They're literally producing thousands of articles every year. Not all of them are about cholesterol, but not all of them about, saturated fat. But most of them reinforce, even if they're about something totally unrelated, they'll reinforce the idea that saturated fat and cholesterol are unhealthy. And this is where doctors go to get their nutrition advice. And many of them are just outright, just repetition about, oh yeah, like this here. Wait, where did I show you before? No, TH10. Oh goodness, where is it? Is that it? Nope. This one. Yeah. So this, sorry guys. This one was a news item on Harvard's website because it was just republishing. It was like publicizing an article that they had published in one of their many journals that showed supposedly replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat is linked with a lower risk of heart disease. They can just publish whatever they want. They own the journals. And they also, I mean, they produce thousands of articles every year. And they also kind of own the people who write the articles, because many of these articles are completely fictitious, written by ghostwriters, and then MDs with affiliations to Harvard or Tufts or Yale or somewhere impressive sign their name to it. They don't even, maybe they read it, but sometimes they don't. There's been exposés about this in the news. So that's like a complete fiction, right? So most of nutrition science around cholesterol and heart disease and strokes is a complete fiction. And it doesn't stop with the American Heart Association, because the American Cancer Society, the American Medical Association now, the American Diabetes Association, they all look to the American Heart Association for their nutrition policy, because the American Heart Association has been doing this so-called research for the longest time. And, the American Heart Association has no problem paying for all this, because this is who funds them. So they get money from big food, from big healthcare, and, big retail. They are the most well-funded nonprofit in the United States. They get upwards of $1 billion a year from their sponsors. So, of course, they're never going to stop. Their massive disinformation campaign, they have no reason. They completely control, they have a lockdown on what doctors think. They have a lockdown on when your doctor is going to tell you that you need to take a cholesterol pill, because they get you coming and going. If your cholesterol is high, well, if you don't want to change your diet and cut out saturated fat and stuff, they're going to give you a pill that's really expensive to take. And statins are also a multi-billion-dollar industry. The statins are the drugs that lower cholesterol. So that's like the really, it's almost like the last conspiracy that no one's talking about, right? I feel like we're living sort of in the year of conspiracies since COVID. There's been conspiracies about everything, and maybe some of them are true, but this one hardly anyone's talking about, and it is true. It's been true for 70 years, and it's just insanity that we're living on this industrial oil that didn't exist before factories. We're eating 80 pounds a year on average. The average person, this 80 number here, this is pounds consumed per year per person in the United States. And how much butter and lard are we consuming? Well, hardly any. So we're eating less butter than we used to, and less lard, of course. We eat, like I said, the same amount of saturated fat, because some of it's coming from hydrogenated oils. But you can just look at this and you can see, well, how can butter and lard be the cause of anything that's happened more lately when we're eating less of them than ever before? If we're talking about things that didn't exist 100 years ago, like type 2 diabetes did not exist. That reason this blue line starts just before 1960 is because there wasn't any. We discovered it, basically. We discovered it in people in 1958. That was when the first case of type 2 diabetes was discovered. Didn't exist here. Type 1 diabetes existed before, but not type 2. And type 2 is the one that's associated with obesity and all these other terrible problems that I went over. So the last piece of this is I just want to share with you why I take this so personally. These are people that are my patients. I'm actually a doctor for ABC, Fine Wine and Spirits, the retail company. They hired me to be their concierge doctor to help all their employees for free. Whether their employees have health insurance or not, they can talk to me about their diet, about any health problem. And I'm not giving out any real patient information. These are just employees of ABC. Any employee of ABC is a potential patient of mine. But when I talk to folks who are employed by ABC, a lot of them have this story. They are from places like Cuba or Puerto Rico, and they have in their recent memory, they have in their family some guy like this, who is living in Cuba and raises their own food and is healthy in their 80s in spite of smoking. right? I think if you're a Cuban, you're required to smoke Cuban cigars. But they know that like one or more of their grandparents, they grew up like raising their own animals, and of course they ate the whole thing. Like they would eat pork and they would have bacon and eat the bacon fat, and they used butter when they could get it, and they didn't eat seed oils because that was more expensive than the food that they were raising themselves. So they have in their recent memory like the reality of what people really used to do to be healthy. But they're told by the American Heart Association, by their doctor, by American culture, that what their grandparents did is something they shouldn't pay any attention to. So, so they don't do that. Don't learn what it was. Don't learn how to cook chicken. Don't learn how to cook, basically. So they don't. And guess where they eat? And I'm serious when I say that half of them, they can't even afford to eat at Walmart. I mean, that's how sad it is, right? That's retail, right? It's not like ABC's an evil company because we don't pay our people enough. That's retail. So that's what, at least they have me. And that's retail in this country. People in retail are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're lucky if they can afford to buy food at Walmart. Most of them shop when they get gas on the way home. And what do they buy? They buy what they think is healthy junk food, because it says right on the package, this is marketed to my patient demographic, folks from South America who speak Spanish. And it's chips, but it's proven to help lower cholesterol, right? Because, guess what is it made out of? Vegetable oil. Vegetable oils actually do lower your cholesterol, but that doesn't have good consequences. And that's part of how they keep using this innuendo to confuse doctors into thinking that vegetable oil is healthy. Because it does lower your cholesterol, but remember, you got to ask, so what? Like, who says high cholesterol is bad? Nobody but the American Heart Association. And they keep pumping out the British Medical Journal and the Cochrane and other sources of medical information, keep pumping out articles that say, hey, look, everybody, there's no evidence that saturated fat or high cholesterol causes heart attacks. Or maybe there's some, but it's like not really much. It's maybe like minimal. So maybe there's something there. We can't tell. But they don't have even, they can't really see the big picture, because unless you're a chemistry geek, and there's very few of us out there, unless you know that this thing is polyunsaturated fatty acid and linoleic acid, and this is the thing that's causing disease, you're not gonna be able to figure it out. So most doctors, even the ones that publish the real true articles that say, hey, there's no link between saturated fat cholesterol and heart attacks and strokes, stop saying that. Even they don't really have a great handle on what actually is the problem and how dangerous these seed oils are. But they're in junk food. You look at any junk food, you're not going to see butter, you're not going to see lard, you're going to see some kind of vegetable oil. Either, the word vegetable oil or one of the other 6 that I have pointed out here. And just a last little thing I want to show you is I did a article on my website. So if you're curious about like more of this, like how is it that they fool doctors and what's the real deal with cholesterol, go to my website and just Google this story about the cholesterol is good, the American Heart Association is bad, on the search of my website. And you can read all about it. It's an ebook. You can download it for free. I think that's so that's the story I wanted to tell, and I hope I've like done justice to the story that this is really a big fat fake. This is really I think just a horrible sin that's being perpetrated on you and your family, your loved ones, by your doctor who doesn't even know that he's doing it. You may have a really great doctor, but he was brainwashed. I didn't know any of this. And I talk about, how I learned about all this stuff on my website and in my books. So there we are. If anybody has any questions, I'm gonna be around for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shanahan. We can feel your passion and see how, how earnest you are about all this. So, does anybody here have any questions for Dr. Shanahan? So I was wondering with not having to worry about, the saturated fat. What does that mean in terms of cholesterol? Like how does that change? And you were talking about statins as well. So what's the link there? If saturated fat is not the problem and cholesterol is, according to maybe your medical doctor, high, or your LDL is low, I mean, is that, what do we need to look at there? I mean, is that a misleading?
Yes, it's not true. So that's why I like ended with a direction to the article, because cholesterol is good. If you have high triglycerides, that's not cholesterol. If you have low HDL, you have low cholesterol. So you have low, what they call good cholesterol. All cholesterol is good. And we have study after study showing that, especially over age 60, people who have high cholesterol live longer. They are less likely to get cancer. They're less likely to get dementia. They're less likely to get infectious diseases. They're less likely to die. So we have lots of evidence that cholesterol is actually good. It's just that doctors don't hear that enough, right? What we hear over and over again is that it's bad. So should you worry about your cholesterol? Well, you got to know if you've got HDL, you got to go, between the difference between your HDL and your triglycerides. You got to know what those numbers are, because if you have high triglycerides, yes, that's a problem. Triglycerides are not cholesterol. So that's one of the things that I do a lot. Like, for people in Florida, I can actually consult with anybody who wants to. You can go to my website, and I don't work with insurance, but you can make an appointment and I can talk with you about your numbers and what they actually are. I can do that for folks in the state of Florida. I couldn't do that outside of Florida. That's part of the thing is when I say people are scared away from eating real food, if you start eating more eggs and cheese and meats and stuff that people always used to eat without any problem, if you start eating more of that stuff and less seed oils, your cholesterol is going to go up, and your doctor's going to scare you. And, they might say you need to take a pill, and you don't, if you're not eating seed oils. If you're a smoker, that's a different story, because like I said, smoking also causes heart attacks, and it, if you can't quit smoking, maybe you'll get some benefit from taking a statin. But if you're not a smoker, then you need to know what your numbers really are, and if you have an issue. But if you're not eating seed oils, you don't have an issue. You can't have an issue. So you need to know, really what you need to know, more important than any of the numbers, is, are seed oils getting into your body or not? So you need to start looking at labels and reading if it has a label. If it doesn't have a label, and you're not in a restaurant, then you're good, because it's regular food.
So I have to tell you, and you are Cornell connected, but I have been taking an online course at Cornell. It's Nutrition and Healthy Lifestyle. And it's a 6-part course, and I've done 3. The third one was on fat, and it's all about saturated fat being evil. Okay. So it's still kind of there.
It's not going to go away. I mean, people are going to be hearing this. Just because I'm talking about it, why would the American Heart Association change anything? They're getting billions of dollars with business the way things are now, right? So they're not gonna back off just because of me, or because there's like a handful of other doctors who are like, hey, this is outrageous. I'm just trying to help, you as an individual human being on planet Earth take charge of your health, because who else is going to do that? Someone's got to do it. But yeah, I mean, the Cornell, Harvard, Tufts, University of Florida, everywhere, they get their nutrition information from the American Heart Association, who wants to support their sponsors, and they like the billions of dollars they're getting. So they're not going to change that.
Yeah, and this is what Shelf Care is all about, is really putting all kinds of information out to our members so that they can think about what, their diet, their nutrition, what's right for them. And if you look at nutrition, there's certain things that that make sense. You want to stay away from fast food. You want to stay away from processed food. You want to eat more vegetables, and those are like easy things to look at and solve, but it's the issue of fat and whether you should eat saturated fat or you shouldn't eat saturated fat. I think that component is the hardest part of understanding nutrition and what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's the most important one to get straight for yourself. You can't be counting on other people. You have to be able, you can't be counting on experts, because the experts like me are miseducated. I was miseducated. I had to go through the looking glass basically and unbrainwash myself and learn the real truth about what I myself was eating. And I changed my diet radically.
I just had a doctor on Alzheimer's speak, and he was opposed to saturated fat and more vegetable driven, which is fine. And that, for me, that's the hardest thing personally, because I love to read books on nutrition, and you have these experts that you think they have the identical information, the science, the research, the facts, but yet people come up with different avenues, different answers to it. So it's just puzzling, and I hope that this has given all of you here some food thought. And does anybody have any questions?
I came in late, so I apologize. I missed a lot of presentation. But I certainly understand and agree with the fact that eating fat doesn't cause fat.
Right.
However, did you discuss what does cause fat?
Did you hear that, Dr. Shanahan?
No, I was cutting in and out. Sorry.
The question is, can we discuss fat doesn't cause fat. Can we discuss what does cause fat?
Fat doesn't cause fat? Or hard? Was that the question? Overeating causes you to gain weight. Overeating. And what makes you overeat? Well, in the Fatburn fix, I talk about how seed oils make you hungry a lot, and because they deprive you of energy. So that's why we're all getting heavy, because we overeat.
Are we all concerned about high density carbohydrate, high glycemic carbohydrate in the diet that relates to high cholesterol and LDLs?
So we're talking about carbohydrates in the diet as it relates to HDL and LDL.
High glycemic.
High glycemic carbohydrates.
Yeah, that'd be good stuff. But forget everything you think you know about HDL and LDL, because we've all been miseducated. There is no bad thing. No, having high HDL and having high LDL is actually good. There is no bad cholesterol. But the high glycemic carbohydrate foods. I mean, the basic word for that is food, right? We don't want processed food. We want food. So what's processed food? Well, if you don't know what that is, then I'll just give you a shortcut. It's got seed oils and it's got sugar and flour, some kind of flour in it. And it stays on the shelf for a long time without. But yeah, so like we want to eat food and we want to stop eating processed food. So processed food contains lots of these oils that they don't give us energy. They make us hungry. You can eat an entire bag of chips that has about 1,000 calories. But I would challenge anybody to eat more than about 5 eggs, which have about 350 calories, because eggs are so full of nutrition, they fill you up.
Well, my problem is that LDLs per se, even though your body needs LDL, excess LDL and I don't know where you're coming from, but that's the excess LDL. In all the studies I've done, I'm a physician, have been related to
What's excess?
cholesterol and coronary
Yeah, well,
arteries.
what is excess? Like, what's the number where we're excess here?
Well, over 100.
Okay,
Or-
I mean, when I first started, personally, me, over 160 was excess. So now it's down to 100, and we're still having lots of heart attacks and strokes. They're increasing actually in the past 10 years.
Well, why is that?
Because we're eating more seed oils.
I think so.
They've tried to make it complicated. It's very simple. They've tried to confuse us. They've succeeded. And if you feel confused, you're not alone. It's because you've been lied to. I was lied to. You were lied to. If you went to medical school, if you read a cereal box when you were a kid, you were lied to. That it's not true that cholesterol really was ever linked to heart disease and strokes. And you can futz with like small dense LDL and stuff like that. But what that really is a marker for is how much seed oils in your diet. Or oxidized cholesterol is another word for it, which is damaged cholesterol particles. So the reason seed oils are bad, actually seed oils can cause heart attacks and strokes, even though they lower your cholesterol, because they oxidize your LDL particles, and oxidized LDL particles don't work. And that's why I directed you guys to my website at the end, because I have a whole article on that. And it, if you read it carefully, it should really help straighten a lot of stuff out.
So the website is www.drkate.com. For anybody that's interested. Any other questions?
There's something on,
So we have
Thank
something to chat here.
I just said thank you. Just, Rachel said thank you.
All right, well, Dr. Shanahan, this has been great. Thank you so much. There's a lot to think about here. And we appreciate your purposeful venture here and your passion, and it's a lot to think about, and we totally appreciate all that you do. And
Well,
all
thanks
your
very
work.
much. Thank you.
Someone did ask what the website is. It's what is it?
www.drkate.com.
Kate with a C, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
And
that,
there's a lot of information on there.
okay, she was just asking, so, okay.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Kate.
Thank you guys. Be well.